Welcome to the Arkansas. I'm Karen Dills and my husband Reed Dills, and we ran Four Corners Rafting from 1976 to 2001. This is a little flashback about how we got here, how the river got to where it is with an industry, and we appreciate you all coming. It's great to see many old friends here, some originals who are in this program. I am not a real techie, as Tish will tell you, so this is not a real dynamic program, but hopefully you will learn a few things. People have been traveling on rivers for transportation and long trails forever. And one of the most famous early explorations, obviously, was Lewis and Clark on the Columbia. However, most of their travel was upriver, which most boaters hate. So, we don't do that. I was surprised to learn that in 1842, one of our early explorers, Lieutenant John Fremont, had a primitive raft consisting of 4 independent rubber cloth tubes, and he used it for surveying the Platte River. And Fremont was here in Chaffee County. A little more currently, rubber rafts really started taking off in World War II. They were used to go from large ships to shore and to bridges for building. Some of those were 20 feet long and used by early Grand Canyon outfitters as well as others. This is one of the biggest explorations, obviously, the Powell's exploration of the Grand Canyon, and this was a geologic exploration. These weren't rafts, but they were the precursors to the Mackenzie riverboats and dories, and rowing techniques evolved from this particular grand adventure. I just learned this today. One of the world's most respected outfitters, Oars, is launching a 42-day, 634-mile journey tracing Powell's exploration on the Green and Colorado rivers from Flaming Gorge to Lake Mead, and includes a full descent to the Grand Canyon. And you can go for the meager price of $20,800. Sign up today. But the first commercial raft trip that I could find was in 1940 by the precursors of the Grand Teton Lodge on the Snake River in Wyoming. And they were using surplus rafts, about 8 by 27 feet. Some of their scenic tour rafts are still descendants of those. They are that big. In 1972, whitewater boating really took off because of the participation of competitive kayaking and canoeing in the Munich Olympics. This is an example of those early World War II rafts that scenic tours were taken in Grand Teton. FIBARC, 1949. This is FIBARC weekend coming up. And this race for decades ran from Salida to Cotopaxi. Early on was for any kind of craft, but mostly canoes and kayaks. And the length and section of this river have changed, and I just looked at their website today, and they said, stay tuned, because it will vary due to the water level. In the 60s in California, this is an old basket boat or bucket boat, and this was one of the many Army surplus rafts. And in these boats, you had to bail out water. So the person who gave me this story is here tonight, Richard Smith. Raise your hand. Richard, raise your hand. I know you can hear. So, and another Richard told me of another friend of his who was kayaking here in the 50s or 60s. But Richard moved here in about 74, and people have been kayaking here for years. And he said a friend of mine, and he had an exciting encounter after he moved here. He'd had a little red shank, about 10 foot, and he decided the river above Granite looked pretty enticing. So he and his buddy launched at the top of Pine Creek. They said, I see the gradient is steepening a little bit, but he started to land on the east bank, but decided that, this doesn't look too bad. It was just a big wave that was smooth, and decided to go for it. Water level was high, so a lot of stuff got washed out. So they took in a lot of water. This was pre-self-bailing. Got to the shore and bailed the boat out. Got back in, and before this, I guess they hit a big wave, and the guy rolled up in the boat in front of him. Got back down, and when they went to shore and bailed, they got back and said, this is a nice-looking wave. I think we'll go. He did, but there was a big hole on the other side. Flipped, lost an oar. But he's still rafting, has been on the San Juan River again, and he's over 80 years old. So we all persist as old boaters. And some of you weren't even born when these people were around, and you've never seen this type of life jacket. This was called Mae West because of the movie actress who had a large chest. And we just had a river rendezvous in Arizona with about 30 of these kind of old people who helped start 5 different river companies. And these started 4: International Aquatic Adventures, Adrift Adventures, River Runners Northwest, and Wilderness Aware. And these included Bill Alexander, who started Wilderness Aware and then sold it to Joe and Sue Greiner for about 30 years. And we sold this blonde, his name is Keith, gear to go start a company in Darrington, Washington called River Runners Northwest. Well, when we moved to Arkansas in 1976, there was one other outfitter in town, and he wouldn't do the shuttle for us. Rocky Mountain Expeditions. In 1972, Dick and Jan Scar. Jan, where are you? Raise your hand. She's in the back. Came from California to raise their 2 kids, Kathy being one of them. Raise your hand. Quiet place. And their soon-to-be partner, Al McClellan, was recently retired from the Coast Guard and wanted to start an outdoor outfitting company with non-motorized things. He met a guy in Hawaii and said, well, you should go to Buena Vista because I have friends, the Waltons, who started Three Elk. And so he came here and they introduced him to Dick Scar, and they decided to open, it was called Base Camp, I believe, at that time, in the old Evergreen Cafe, which is now Counterculture, finally open. In 75, they became involved with rafting on the Arkansas, and boatmen were self-taught pretty much. Several years later, they hired Jim Stolquist, who had significant experience boating up in northern Colorado, or kayaking mostly. But Jim built his own kayaks and started his own company. And Al told me just yesterday that Jim wanted to be an engineer, but Al persuaded him to go into business. Some of you know that Colorado Kayak Supply is a very successful business that Jim started and ran for many years, and then he sold it to Earl and Cheryl Richmond, who then sold it to Megan and Brad Kingman. And Stolquist kept his own line of life jackets, etc., who sold them to a very large international company called Body Glove. Jim was just paddling with Bill Baker the other day. There. So, in what year? 79, Dick and Al split off, and so Dick and Jan did hiking and backpacking, and Al stuck to rafting. He had little boats. He hired early guides besides Jim. Peter Anderson is a well-known writer living in Crestone. Bill Block, who lives in the valley and taught skiing at Monarch forever. And he and Irina Todoritis started Independent Whitewater. Rocky Mountain closed in 1984, and Al went on to other things. But Dick and Jan continued to run their company, which is now called the Trailhead, which was most recently in Valley White House building before they moved to the old, whatever it is, the highway building, yes, which used to be a bar. But they sold it to Keith and Evelyn Baker before they sold it to Dave Blazer. And Al was a big publicity guy. So he got the newspapers and the Rocky Mountain News and all this to come see what all this rafting stuff was about. When we moved to town, the industry was growing very quickly. Jan's son-in-law, John Brown, raise your hand, John, worked for us for many years. And as times were changing, the names changed too. Early on, and still in some places, they were boatmen, even though women were running boats as well. So the terminology changed to river guide. And Irina and I were one of the very first female guides, and our company, Four Corners, at one time had more than 50% of its guides as female. In 1979, FIBARC started the raft race that ran the same 26 miles. So 2 of our guides, one a woman, and Tim Stang, one of my first local guides, is here, put 2 of our frames together. And one was the rudder, and they raced the 26 miles and won that first race. Some years later, Reed and Bill Alexander and an engineer from CSU did the same thing, and they won. And then these engineers said, let's use the new exercise machines that have the sliding seats and put them on the boats. That didn't work. Not good. Yeah, very last. So our personal story was I grew up in Miami, Florida. Reed grew up in Dayton, Ohio. And we met at Ohio State. I was going to grad school, and Reed was working on another teaching degree. He'd been a naturalist at a state park and did canoe trips. I went to a party at his house with another guy and dated another guy I met at that house, and then Reed never called me for a year.
Tell him why.
He was going off to do a red-winged blackbird study there. But so one day I'm sitting in the office of my boss, because I was an assistant dorm director, and I'm sitting on the floor and the phone rings, and it turns out it was Reed, and he was looking for two things, a dorm job and me. And he got both in one phone call there. So we, after graduation, we went to Rochester and taught for a couple years. In 1971, we rafted the Youghiogheny with some friends in one of those little yellow sporting goods rafts. Just followed a kayaker down. It's no big deal. Did that a few more times. Moved to Greeley for grad school for Reed. And then we got a teaching job in Mancos, southwestern Colorado. So we floated on the Dolores River before McPhee Dam. The only fist fight Reed almost got into was with an attorney when we were fighting the McPhee Dam there, but we lost. So in 75, I was teaching PE 7 through 12, coaching 3 sports, and I was the guidance counselor. And that year, after my year was over, the principal decided that he didn't like the fact I was sending sexually active girls to Planned Parenthood. So he said I'd rather my daughter get pregnant, so they non-renewed me. It's the only year I didn't join the teachers union, but you know, growth through stress. And so they changed Reed's description from 4 preps to like 6, so he quit. The lucky thing was it was the first year teachers could get unemployment, thanks to Jerry Ford. So we had to keep looking for jobs, and we did, but we rafted a lot and we played a lot. And then we said we have to do something to make money. So we said we'll start an expedition company. We'll do backpacking trips in the Waimanooch, and we'll do rafting on the Dolores. Because a few people were running multi-day trips on the Dolores, but nobody was running day trips, and Mesa Verde National Park was right there. So we bought a van and a raft, and we trade off rowing and driving, and we met in the City Market parking lot in Cortez, and we took 110 people down the Dolores. On one of those trips, we met a guy who was working for River Runners on the lower river. I'd gotten a teaching job up here, so he said, I'm going to Alaska in July, so why don't you come take my place, Reed? So we did. And he worked Bighorn Sheep Canyon for that summer. And we could have bought River Runners because it was for sale, but they had crappy equipment and the ash oars were way too heavy. We already had a company, so we said, we'll just see what we can do. I keep pushing the wrong button. So the first year we ran out of the High Rocky, which was across from Collegiate Peaks Bank. Susie, thank you very much, her store. And the old sports mine is where Mountain Sports House T-shirt shop is in Concha Springs. We had 2 other guides, and all 4 of us rode up to 2 trips a day. We hardly ran any day trips at all. We got 2 camping contracts from Dude Ranches, and in subsequent years we did about 3 or 4 more. So we were lucky that we had regular business coming every year from these large Dude Ranches. One of our best things that we enjoyed was taking the folks from Craig Hospital down. And they chose us to take their people who were paraplegics, quadriplegics, we took the deaf and the blind, and that was really inspirational for our guides to see these people get out and really be able to laugh and enjoy nature out there. In 1990, we bought Arkansas River Tours down in Cotopaxi because we were doing some joint marketing with their owner, but we sold it in 95 after the highest water year. I'm a little bit of a micromanager, so I like to see all my guides and know what's happening. Don't laugh, Linda. And so that was a good thing. In 2001, I retired from teaching, and we hadn't anticipated selling our business, but my first 8th grader and longtime operations manager, Jim Sampson, wanted to buy it, so we said, okay, we'll just do all that. Since then, Four Corners sold twice, and then the permit was retired. The building, which is across from the Nathrop Post Office, is now Colorado Rafting Adventures. So in terms of the whole rafting industry, in the 70s and 80s, those 20 years were pretty transformational. The equipment changed. I'm not going to read all this to you. There was a lot of interest growing, and river conservation really began. Our frames went from wood to PVC, which came apart on me in a route through snaggletooth one year, to light aluminum frames. The oars changed. People went from cotton t-shirts. This is an original 1977 t-shirt. These are decades old, the first wet dry shorts, to wet gear when it's cold. Nobody's going to rent wetsuits this year, probably. Yeah. The Wild and Scenic Rivers Act came into play to really help protect our rivers and habitats for conservation. Oops, I got to get to this. Oh, there it is. Okay. So this is us with our PVC frame, our first band, 1976, and our first, in Cosgrove. In our first modular home, brand new on Baylor, 28 grand. Lately it's sold for over 400. We don't get it. This is one of our first upgraded boats, an old Miwok with wood frame, ash oars, guy in the reeds in front. One guy is the one I went to the party with and met Reed. So this was on the Animus in 1976. That's my dad. I'm rowing him with his May West on the Lower River in Bighorn Sheep Canyon in 76. Yeah. Anybody know what kind of boat this is? Yeah. It's an old Udisco. Had no upturned bow. It kind of turned down, except Tim would know that boat. There. With a wooden frame. This is one of the first paddle trips in that Udisco, using those old May West life jackets. This is one of the self-bailers on the Arkansas. This is a Moravia about 1983. You can see our metal frame, and this is where plumbing came in. Skippy, were you here? Okay, a haircut there. So Reed's stepfather in Ohio ran a plumbing fitting business, and we decided they would put railings together. So California made a day frame, but we used it not with wells, but with these fittings. So you could flip the oarlocks in and out to make stacking easier. You could change the size. So we manufactured these for a year or two and said that's way too much work. So we hired downriver equipment and to make our frames. And they still use these fittings, and Riverboat Works uses these fittings as well, and they were tested in the Grand Canyon. So these are other changes. Lunch went from crap, bologna, and Four Corners, we had a nickname, but I'm not going to tell you that. Bologna, cheese, to pre-made ham salad, all this kind of junk. Now these people do gourmet food, probably get bread from Simple Eatery, The riverware changed. No communication. If you had an accident, who knows what happened. We finally got some Motorola radios. People had standard hand signals. Now they have cell phone service with satellite links. The what?
Flash flood.
Oh yeah, I will tell you the flash flood story. So one year in the late 70s, I think, maybe early 80s, we're down at Hecla and it's raining, pouring, and Diarrhea Creek is what we call it. It's an irrigation ditch that runs from west of Highway 285 across the road, the bridge, wiped out the bridge. So all of us were stranded, Whitewater Photography had a little Volkswagen, so we were shuttling some people up. We had a person who was hypothermic on one of our trips, so we got her up there and were able to shuttle her across the ditch and get her to the hospital. But that was an extreme event, but Diarrhea Creek does not run very much anymore. So photos that are a lucrative business now, except maybe not this year. First there were no photos, then we did film. I have no clue as to how we got those developed. We had our own people take photos. CDs where you ordered them and you could have them printed. They printed them up on top of one of the hills there and bring them down to you. Now you just online order, you can see all your proofs and then pay BV Art and Photo. Some companies do their own photos, not too many. We hired people like Tim because we wanted people who were local. Housing then wasn't a problem. And I like to have people who were going to go to college for 4 years because they needed a summer job, and it's hard to train somebody to do it right. If I hired somebody from Joe, I always had to retrain him. No, I'm kidding. No, not from Joe, but from other people. It's easier to get it done the right way, our way, Karen's way. There. So family, friends, local high school grads, college students, a lot of teachers. But the internet changed all that. You could get people from all over the country and the world. There's still a New Zealander who comes, and he's come for 40 plus years, I think. Immigration laws changed to make that a little bit harder too. Again, housing for non-locals was hard. They camped a lot. Rocky Mountain Expeditions used a place we called Little Cambo. We rented that after they went out of business. And now River Runners has that for their staff. That's an experience that guides never forget. Yeah. How did people get trained? The 5 guys in that earlier picture, it's just all self-taught. Trial and error for the most part. Repeated trips, do it over and over and over. There were a few books out. Bill McGinnis's book. There's some local books that were out. One of our guides, who was a geologist, wrote a couple books about the Ark. Safety, when we came, there was 0 safety requirements because nobody was managing the river. Finally, parks, when we got it, required first aid and CPR. The outfitters worked with state parks to get some better first aid requirements and different course offerings. The commercial rafting, this is a list of kind of how people came into the mix. There. And there have been other players who were here, and Bill, I think I forgot you on there, I'm sorry. The year we came was the worst drought until this year, and so far, still the river level was lower in '77 than it is now. So we got through it, and those guys will get through it too. This was an old 16-foot bucket boat, Avon Pro, Reed Rowan in the 80s. This is the Royal Gorge in 1880 when they were constructing the railroad. This is the Royal Gorge enjoying rafters today. And I've just heard recently that at this level, trips going through the gorge, passengers have to get out and walk around while the guides turn it sideways and slide through a really narrow place. I don't remember. The gorge is not my thing. And there have been new rapids formed down there. So in the old days, reservations, I kept an old book of all the reservations I ever had and gave it to Andy Nidus, and who knows what happened. He kept it on a form, in a book. Computers came around '81. I think Joe's relative helped us write one of the first reservations programs. Those 2 guys are still in the valley. Now office folks don't even talk to the potential customers. People just do it online, and so they have to really screen them when they show up to make sure, no, you're not 350 pounds and you cannot go on the numbers because you never have been on a raft trip before. But online, they don't know that till they get there. So if they show up, can screw up your whole logistics. I was a logistics person, so the competition between companies, there were 60 some at one time. It was always there, but if you had an emergency, didn't matter who you worked for, they would come and help you. And then if you were unruly, I can remember when we were on vacation, our guides took the bus to the drive-in, got a little rowdy, and somebody complained, and they said, "Who do you work for?" And we said, "Buffalo Joe." Whatever. What did those guys do for fun? They had a lot of fun. They didn't really abide the drinking age. The Vic in Salida used to be a really great place to go with live music and dancing. The Lariat went from a miner's bar to a boater's bar, and we used to have disco nights. Numerous parties at Cambo. Some of these guys played all their own music. It was very fun. The Lower River Runners apparently had a downstairs bar that liked to have underage drinkers. There wasn't very much to do in Canyon, Brothers Bar in Canyon, until the 2 places opened on 8 Mile Hill. Now, what does it cost a boat? Then, I think Rocky Mountain had $15 for a half-day trip, up to $25, $45 for a full day. Now, many outfitters charge over $100 for a half-day trip. Payments were made by cash or check, so credit cards didn't even exist. Now it's all pay online ahead of time. Guide pay, and Tim always reminds me of this, $15 for a half-day trip. And now some people make over $100 a trip for a half day. The feds had an influence. The change in labor laws really hurt the multi-day business, because what is an 8-hour day? You have to pay overtime. Those guys are working 24 hours straight. They're responsible for your safety. So what do? That's been a bit of a mess. We knew outfitters in the early years who didn't run hardly any people. They grossed maybe a $500 profit. Others grossed $2 million. Many owners today mostly still have to work more than one job or have a spouse who does, or they run multiple rivers. More recently, from the 90s, it's very acceptable for you to go rafting. I mean, there's corporate business retreats, and there's family reunions, and school trips and all this, music trips that Bill Dvorak used to run there. And the outfitters became very well established, and river permits were no longer just get your piece of paper and go. They're very hard to get. They're very limited. Let's see, some of the fishing permits are, you can't get one on the Arkansas unless you buy anyone. Same thing with running your raft trip. But the river communities like BV and Salida, Canyon, realized that rafting and rafters were part of society's fabric and a huge economic contributor. And the various entities realized water releases could help us out. The rafters became stakeholders just like farmers and ranchers and electric companies and water districts. And Reed will tell you a little bit more about that. I'm going to use this freaking pointer. Okay, so these are the rapids, the difficulty here. I'm not going to go into detail. The various sections of the river. This starts with the numbers. Pine Creek is up above here, and Wild Horse and Narrows, if you want, are in this area. So there's sections, and they're managed differently for different numbers of rafts. Access was very limited. Reed will tell you in the early years, Ruby Mountain used to be owned by Frank McMurray. We used to have our lunches there, put in there. Johnson Village, there was just a little slidey public place you could go down in. So that was one of the reasons that we were struggling a little bit in terms of access. There was a weir in Royal Gorge. The Pink House there, those of you who've gone in the gorge, was used for 30 years, but now only AROA members can use that. The BV Town constructed a put-in. The Salida Coors boat ramp, because they got a grant from Coors, was constructed. South Main Playway started in 2000. The Scoutway had to be redone a couple times in Salida. The Lowhead Dam above Salida got a boat chute. One of our guides on a fishing trip didn't see the sign and went over the dam and flipped and lost a bunch of fishing gear. Not a good thing, but live and learn. In 2024, that Lowhead Dam was removed down there. This is a really terrible picture. It was in the newspaper of the big excavator down here, right by past the softball fields, digging out the river so we could put in the boat chute in 1988. The Cogan Ditch. And this is Chaffey County Times from '88, because Wilderness Wear was running $5 trips in celebration of the boat chute. Right here. You only had to pay them $5. Now, what were guides thought of in the early years? These are some of the adjectives that are there. You can read. Now they recognize how difficult a job that can be every day, the professionalism, the dedication. They're not going to get rich doing this. The hard work, there's some smart. Today, churches were offering free lunch to anybody, but they started doing that for raft guides. Free showers. Guides have gone on to participate in everything you imagine. Our guides have been doctors, lawyers, priests, teachers, engineers, electricians, you name it. Two of our recent county commissioners were river guides, Greg Felt and P.T. Wood. All right, audience question. What recent world leader in the last 5 years was a river guide here on the Arkansas? Come on, seriously. Good looking, Justin Trudeau. Canada's former president. And he was also a whitewater rafting guide instructor. So this year, there are going to be potential low water delays. We were on the river fishing last year in April, and this is a little video. Oh, there, okay. Why isn't it? Okay. This isn't exciting, but it's It's exciting if you were on one of those boats. Anybody know what rapid this is? Hear me?
And you don't have your oars?
Raft River.
You lost an oar, huh?
Yeah.
Did pop an oar. I think ultimately got it back. This is the friggin' right side of Raft River. Whoever wants to be there. So, there were other boats on this trip, not just the red boats.
They didn't have a spare either.
They did have a spare one. A few years ago, Parks made a rule that you can't have more than 10 boats in a group. This is one reason, and you should be spread out. Hopefully they will be, so this does not happen. You have room to pull over and wait, or be able to go around them. However, every water has its different challenges, and this year is going to be one of those. Now, some years ago, the old Chaffey County Tourism Board did a promo a couple years ago at a more normal level.
There
This
are
will
various
come again.
boating opportunities to experience the Arkansas River. Our most popular
Hope you can hear
five
it.
are the Numbers. The Numbers is perfect for those looking for a challenging, non-stop, action-filled Colorado whitewater rafting trip. The 7 major rapids are the most continuous section of whitewater on the entire Arkansas River. Browns Canyon National Monument. Browns Canyon National Monument is where you'll experience legendary rapids like Pinball, Zoom Plume, and Staircase, all within the beauty of the Granite Canyon walls. Salida Town Run. On the Salida Town Run, a few mellow rapids will offer splashes throughout this scenic boat trip. This is a great section of river for families or those looking for an introductory trip on milder water. Bighorn Sheep Canyon. Bighorn Sheep Canyon is wild enough to catch you wet, but mild enough for you to take in the scenery of the canyon and look for bighorn sheep. Royal Gorge. Definitely a top 5 run on the Arkansas River. The Royal Gorge has everything you could want in a Colorado whitewater rafting trip. Big rapids along with grand geologic features.
So if you haven't gone, you need to go.
There are various-
All right. So, but what really hasn't changed over these 50 years or whatever is the fun of going rafting regardless of the water level. Such a beautiful place. You know, you're in a short place, there's no cars, at least in Browns Canyon. And great guides who prioritize your safety and want you to learn something about the area. So if you haven't been, you need to get out there and go. And I had 2 quotes of ex-guides that stick in my mind. Growth through stress, which you will have if you are in this business, and sometimes if you are on a boat. And that was by Keith Bernson, who started River Runners Northwest. He was a school teacher and a principal. And giving all those safety talks made me very comfortable talking in front of other people, including juries. From Jim Goodwin, who is an Arizona attorney. So I'm going to turn this over to my husband, Reed, and at the end we will take questions. I got
2 things you need to remember: perseverance and collaboration. That's what this talk is all about. Because without what outfitters and communities in Colorado did, we wouldn't be here today. We needed an outfitter association. And by 1978, by 79, we formed 2 outfitter associations. One for the Arkansas, called AROA, and another one we'll talk about later, was for the state. And you want to know why? Well, access issues. Just a quick example. You couldn't put in town of Buena Vista. It was a dump, and there was trash everywhere. You couldn't even get down to the river. That's one example. Water flows. 77 was the worst year, then 78, 79, 80, spectacular. 81, I was just talking to Bill DeVores about this, 81 was another really bad year. And so the outfitters that were here were realizing that we got a problem here. So we'll talk more about this later. And then as business people everywhere, we had insurance issues. And the biggest issue we had at all was called the Emmert decision. And that was basically a situation where a guy was arrested for floating through somebody's private property. The landowner called him and they arrested him. He went to trial and lost. And so, and what happened at the end, the Colorado legislature had a solution that was part good and part bad. The good part was you couldn't be sued criminally, but you could be sued if you did something that actually caused a problem with the landowner. So what's happened, that's the way it is now. So generally speaking, it's not, most rivers, it's not a problem because we avoid the rivers where you just can't get through, and then places like the Arkansas have flourished. And then the same year, 79, we formed the Colorado River Association because we have 7 river basins here and everything's issued. One of the biggest issues was outfitter fees. How many of you, anybody in here pay out fees of anything to the federal government? Like if you're a rancher and you're running cattle on public lands? So the deal is that we would pay money to the Bureau, and the Bureau would send it to Washington, and we never saw it again. So that was, we were pissed off about that. So, as I said, perseverance is very important, and stick-to-itiveness and cooperation. So about in the mid 80s, our association started working, talking to the BLM, Western River guys. Jerry Mallett's here tonight. Pass. Jerry, raise your hand. Jerry was instrumental working with the Western River Guides Association on working on a lot of these issues. And he also became a county commissioner, so a lot of Radford people are county commissioners here. But anyway, no management. The BLM basically realized they couldn't manage outfitters because it's about 40% BLM, 60% private, so they couldn't manage it. So, along with Jerry, who's here tonight, and Pete Macris, who I think still lives in town, he owned Buffalo Joe, and Bill Dvorak, who's here himself, and myself, and a bunch of other people put together a plan, and this is the Arkansas Headwaters Recreation Area. As you know, it's 150 miles from basically Leadville to Canyon City. We actually went to Washington, Bill and I and Jerry and some other people, and worked out some things. And I wanted to read what happened when we went to Washington. So by combining, what we did was this has never happened before. The BLM and state parks co-managed the Arkansas Headwaters Recreation Area. Never been done before. And I think Jerry was a prime guy to get this done, but this is interesting. Some of the major benefits to outfitters include user fees being spent on the river, plus an additional $500,000 for capital improvements and new improved river access for 1990. This is more than the BLM's total budget for the last 10 years on the Arkansas River. And I was there, Bill was there, some other people were there. That's how, there's the collaboration, there's the stick-to-itiveness, because it's not just people like myself, it's organizations, it's communities. I got a picture here with the governor. I mean, everybody was involved with this. Okay, the next big issue we had. How many of you were aware that there were 2 dams that were planning on being built in the 90s? Okay, well, 1987, our Upper Arkansas Water Conservancy District thought it was a good idea to build a dam in Elephant Rock, which is above Buena Vista, or Browns Canyon. I think that pissed off some people. In 1990, Colorado Springs filed, they actually filed to build a dam. So Dick Scar was one of the prime guys, plus outfitters, who put together a plan to fight this. There were big billboards up and everything. And the commissioners went from wanting to have a dam built to saying, no, we don't want a dam anymore. We got towns like Buena Vista and Salida passing resolutions. And then the good news, and this is what you call perseverance, started at 87. In 1997, Friends of the Arkansas got agreement with the Colorado Springs utility to not build the dam. And you think that's pretty good? Well, guess what? It took until 2012 before there was a district court decree that solidified that. There's a copy on the table back there, and you can look at that. So, okay, now the next issue.
Teamwork.
Back before '93, which you can read on there, the BLM there was legislation passed called Footnote, and BLM was required to investigate all their land to see if there was any wilderness areas that might be good for study. So they came out after they went through, this is the whole country, not just here, and the BLM designates Browns Canyon as a wilderness study area. This is 1993. And then in 2001, the Forest Service designated 25,000 acres as wilderness. So at that time, Friends of Browns Canyon was formed in 2003. And again, Michael Kunkel, Bill Dvorak, Michael Kunkel, and were the basic people, and even Dick Scar was involved. And then Bill came in later, and he actually helped run the organization. So 2004 to 2014, 10 years. We got legislation introduced. We thought it was going to pass. The guy who was representing us in Congress, super good Republican guy, got pissed off with one of his compatriots, another Republican, and they stopped the legislation. And so that's when we went the other route. So again, another year, President Obama was obviously president and used the Antiquities Act to get the monument designated to what we have now. It's about 28,000 acres, Bill? Okay. And we had a ceremony here, and all the big wigs came out. This is what it looks like. It's a low elevation monument, which is not real common. So whereas a lot of national monuments can't get used in the wintertime, this monument is heavily used in the wintertime. Now, hopefully your eyes are not going to glaze over, but this is the most important thing that has happened to the Arkansas River. It's called the Voluntary Flow Management Program. I started working on flows in 1981. I started meeting with people with the different water issues who ran things here. The Southeastern Water Conservation District, which basically runs the FRIAR project, started in '81. So met with Bureau in '82. '86, the Bureau of Reclamation is a federal agency. They're the ones that run the dams, okay? They realized that there was a possibility for an early release of water if the reservoir evaporation was compensated. Well, in '89, they built this thing 10 years earlier, and they had to go back and fix the dam. And so what were they going to do? They were going to release all the water in the winter. We had a drought. That was a drought year. So a bunch of the outfitters, the fishermen, trout and lemon was involved. Local community activists got involved in a meeting. We convinced them to release the water in August from Twin Lakes. So instead of being out of business in the middle of that year, we probably would have been out of business because nobody ran low flows. Nobody ran below 400 back in those days. And so anyway, we got cooperation from the Bureau. They released the water, 89. In 1990, because the other thing we've done, and we may not have time to talk about it, but the Arkansas Headwater Recreation Area is formed. And so we got the state of Colorado to actually okay releases of 700 cubic second feet from July 1st to August 15th. And that was a compromise. The outfitters, we wanted more, and the fishermen wanted less. And so we came to an agreement. And the amount was 10,000, but that was not the minimum. But you had to go back. If you needed more than 10,000 acre feet, you go back and request it. So, again, 1982 to 1990, perseverance. So, this is, you can read up there about some of the history of what's been going on. We just talked about the flow agreement. Try to limit it. This is really interesting. So when we got the flows in 90, they sued. And so what happened was we had the releases going on. The suit took effect in August. The judge said, shut it down. The judge shut it down. And then after the season was over, the whole case was dismissed. So now we have an Arkansas Headwaters Recreation Area, so what are we going to do? We're going to figure out how to solve the flow problem. So that's what happened. 92, negotiations were done, and it's very complicated, but I'll just make it simple. Every year, when I say we, that state parks, wildlife, outfitters had to go back and get permission to do this. So we're going to move on from this. But, this is a map that just basically, if you don't know much about the Frying Pan, Arkansas project, the water that is used here is West Slope water. The water, and it's coming, if you look at the red, so it comes across, there's a tunnel, and it goes into Turquoise. From Turquoise, it goes into Twin. And from Twin, it goes two different places. Most of it just goes down the river. Some of it goes into the Hope State pipeline. But anyway, so that project was built half ag and half municipal. And so that's what we were dealing with. But it's amazing because what we found out, if you know anything about water oil, you know it's first in use, first in time. You get the, but the deal is we weren't buying water. We just wanted them to move water from one place to another, and they figured that they, meaning state water engineer, they figured out you can do it because you're moving it from one bucket to another bucket, and as long as you satisfy the water users that their water use is not going to be denied, they're okay with it. So two things happened there. One was outfitters agreed to pay for the evaporative loss. That was early in the days, and then state parks came in and said, well, we'll make it easy on you. We're just going to charge you a little more for your user day, and it wasn't very much, and we'll pay for that. Well, in the meantime, over the years, the state has pretty much figured out how to get water. Sometimes wildlife has water in a bucket, and they use that water for evaporative loss. So it's been a great deal. This gives you an idea of why we needed a flow program. This is the up and downs in the flow over the years. I can't even remember. 1990 and 2016. So the outfitters were really on top of it early on, and it's really made a difference. Some success, partially due to the flow program. $28 million to $36 million from 20 to 22. And we're not going to bore you with all the specifics. That's just a lot of money. I've checked on this because I've been told, and I know all the outfitters have been told, the Arkansas River is the most popular commercial river in the United States. And when I went online the other day, I said, No, you're not anymore. You're number 2. So I went back and researched it today, and if you can believe AI, we are still number 1. And the other thing that's changed is that the private use has increased significantly. Joe and Sue might know a percentage, but I know that back when we started outfitting, it was like 90%, 10%. Now, if you're counting kayakers and rafters, I bet it's more like 70-30, something like that. So, we're going to get done pretty early here. The primary conservation organizations we've already talked about. I mean, the outfitters. We've got a list here. Oh, well, you can go to this website. Now, we'll just leave this on after we're done if you want to come up and copy it. But anyway, so we've got Friends of Browns Canyon now. We've been around for a long time. We're still helping manage Browns Canyon National Monument. And you can understand why, because there's hardly anybody working for the Forest Service or BLM anymore. So they need all the help they can get. Garna would not exist without the Arkansas Headwaters Recreation Area. And I think that would. Okay. And real quickly, we want to let you know who we're thanking. Jan Scar, we've talked about. Is Irina here? I guess they didn't make it. But Echo Canyon Expeditions, Wilderness Aware, River Runners, Bob Hamill, who's Executive Director of Aurora. And that's John Kresge, who works for Headwaters. Arkansas River Conservation Collaboration. Does anybody know who they are?
The whole group of organizations that talk to each other.
Because I've never heard of them. But anyway, they helped us out. Greg Feld, who helped us, and he's the manager of, he's now the manager of the Upper Arkansas Water Conservancy District and the Chaffee County Times. So I think we have time for some questions between the both of us. We should be able to figure out the answer.
Oh no, Sarah. Sarah Kuhn, ex-guide for Four Corners.
Worse. Yeah, but
I read the figure, and the figure in July 1st of 77 was 310 CFS, and it's projected to be about 361 for this year. But we survived, so.
yeah, it was not quite as bad. You got to remember the Fry Arc in '77. They were just completing everything, so they were still in a filling process for the reservoirs. So we honestly don't know if there were any releases. But to get, I know it's hard to understand volumes, but people who know water, they know acre feet. And so normally, Fry Arc imports 60,000 acre feet on average. This year, 0. No imports at all. So this is a year, what you're seeing now is there were some early releases, there will be no new releases for any reason because there just isn't any water to release.
And the early releases this year came because they're working on Clear Creek Dam. Other questions?
Well,
Normally, the gold medal is determined by the amount of biomass per whatever part for fisheries. And normally, the angling people will tell you a lower water year, if it's not too low, is good for reproduction. If it gets too low, it gets too warm and it kills fish. So, and that will happen on the lower river sooner than it does here. And various species of trout survive better at different water. Is that it? the anglers, the people who are paying to go fishing are not going to make up for the people who pay normally to go rafting. Would you agree, Joe?
And it's going to be interesting because, as we talked about earlier, everything was a compromise. But even, and one of the biggest things that nobody talks about, and a lot of us didn't like the idea of when it happened, was in the early days, parks and wildlife were separate, and they didn't get along. So parks was pushing whitewater rafting, wildlife was pushing fishing. And so when it came time every year for them to go to the Department of Natural Resources to come up with a plan, they were squabbling until they finally came up with an agreement. And it took wildlife a long time to realize that there were other benefits to the flow program, like we talked about, maintaining certain flows in the fall, certain flows in the spring, and not adding water during the runoff. And so basically, and everybody realizes that these are recreational issues. These aren't biological issues. Those of you who have lived here, but even before Karen and I, know that the Arkansas is heavily polluted. The brown trout lasted 2 years. If you caught a 10-inch brown trout back then, wow. If you caught a 3-pound brown trout, wildlife put it in the river.
Yeah.
So it's been and once it was really interesting because I worked on this for a long time, and I was on the task force for 5 years, and in the early days, wildlife was not listening. But by the 90s and 2000, we had all these years where they see it working, and they see, well, it's better to tweak it this way than to worry about the summertime flows. And so the good news now is that the voluntary flow program is the epitome. All the water people, from ranchers to municipalities to boaters to fishermen, think it's the greatest thing that's ever been done. But you got to remember too that what happens when there's water, when it's snowing or raining on the east side, they have to pass that water through. They can't store it. So when water's coming into Turquoise, it's from the east slope, and it's coming through Clear Creek, and it's coming through Twin Lakes, we have to pass that water through. And if you think about it, 100 cubic feet per second is hardly anything. If we have a summer with rain, which we don't get very much anymore, if we have a good monsoon, you will see the river come up a little bit. There have been years when we didn't need the voluntary flow program because it rained so much that they kept the river high.
Oh, yeah.
You can still put a boat in on Twin Lakes, but you can't do it.
Anything else? Thank you all so much for coming. And if anybody wants to go to the Lariat afterwards and reminisce, come on back.
Good job, Maria.
Thank you, Tish.